Hey guys, quick intro. This is a video that I shot some months ago with another Cédric. He runs the Startup Tech Show. We talked about all things decentralized, my 64 things and the various projects that I'm engaged with. And back then my full-time business was still Centask, so this video is not 100% up to date. Still, here's my conversation with Cédric. I hope you enjoy. As you already mentioned, my name is Cédric. I'm also enthusiastic about startups. I started my first company when I was 14, mostly by accident. And since then, I've been really fascinated with the idea of how do you get from an idea that you had at the bar last night to something that does 1 million. And 1 million could be $1 million in revenue or 1 million users or 1 million packages shipped. And so the last few years, I've dabbled in various startups, both as an investor and as a founder. And it just so happens that the last few years I've traveled so much that I decided to give up on having a constant home and live out of a bag. Because I think last year I've done over 120 flights and it was just not sustainable to travel back to my flat just to be there for the flat. I probably started thinking about it maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. And it started as one of many experiments that I like to do. One day I was fascinated with the question, how much stuff do I actually own? Which sounds like a simple question, but it's hard to put a number to it unless you count it. So what I did is I started to walk through my flat and I collected everything on a spreadsheet. And at that point I realized, I don't know what the exact number was, but I realized I own 700 things or whatever it was. And I already felt like I live a somewhat minimalistic or simple lifestyle when it comes to things. And so I was a bit shocked. And of course, as soon as you have a number, you can start optimizing it, right? And then I started thinking, if I could only own one pair of shoes, which shoes would I own? If I could only own one type of t-shirts, how many t-shirts would I need and what type of t-shirt? Yeah, and that's how I started to think about it. And then about 2 years ago, I decided to completely give up on having an apartment. And at that point, it's only, I reduced everything that I have to just 64 things at the time.
Is it like cheaper to live like that overall?
So I think it's not a cheap lifestyle. It's a lot, like travel is expensive, flights and hotels. For me, probably right now it's cheaper because most of those trips would happen anyway because I have to travel so much. On top of that, I would be paying for a flat and what are all the costs that are associated with that. But I don't think it's cheaper than, in general, living in one place and settling in one place.
Right. But in terms of stuff that you own, let's say, excluding the apartment?
I very rarely make an impulse purchase, right?
Yes.
It doesn't happen too often.
Space.
So I think I'm pretty immune to discounts and like the typical things that the media throws at us to make us buy stuff. So I don't waste a lot of money that way. Usually I think quite a long time before I buy something. Usually it takes me 2 weeks just to buy like a new pair of pants or whatever because I want to be sure like the material is better than what I've had before and it offers some pragmatic benefits. So yeah, I definitely spend less money on things than a lot of other people that I know. But I probably spend more on experiences and travel.
Tell us a little bit about your experiences as an investor.
I started investing in startups, mostly in Switzerland and Berlin, about 4 years ago with my company Tenderloin Ventures. It's me and my friend who put money together with the idea to invest in companies and then be very active with them, both to provide value to the startup because they basically get an additional workforce, get my inputs. And on the other side, I learned a lot about the process of what goes well and what doesn't go well in that early stage of a startup. So that was the approach. We invested in kind of 2 types of companies. One is Swiss e-commerce in niche markets, and the other is companies that scale really well. And the criteria there usually is, the way we think about it is like, at scale, you can add 1,000 to 10,000 new members or users without adding one single staff on the company side. So there's, for example, one of the investments that we've done is Yodel or Frontify is another one. Just like applications that scale really well once they've reached a certain point.
Yeah. Is there something, let's say, when you look at the startups and you say like, okay, like those are the criteria that you would say like they have to be met beyond, let's say, the scalability?
Because we invested so early on, usually within the first year, more often within the first 6 months of the company's existence. It's all about the team and trusting the founders, finding founders that we believe in and which I wanted to spend so much time working with. So yeah, I'd say team, because the idea in almost all cases has slightly or not so slightly changed since that point, right? So you figure out what the problems are. Even if it's not a 180-degree pivot, you very often have to change or adapt to market and your learnings. So I think team is the number one thing that I try to assess.
Sure. Okay, so let's move on a little bit about the ecosystem, which I believe, because you travel so much, you probably see a lot of startups, a lot of investors around the world. Maybe if you, I don't know, which ecosystem beyond Switzerland you feel the most comfortable with, but maybe you can compare it, let's say, to what you see here in Zurich or in Switzerland in general, and anything that you feel like this is a big differentiator in positive or negative way to the Swiss ecosystem.
I would probably pick Berlin because that's where I've spent a lot of time as an investor. I think one key difference that I've seen in the examples that I've seen is that in Berlin it's much easier to start something which requires less money, and also I feel there is more venture capital for that initial first phase. But the downside of that is that people also seem to give up a bit quicker. So I feel it's quicker to get started on something in Berlin, but then it's also easier to let it go. Whereas here in Switzerland, I often feel people think more about an idea or work on a prototype while they still have another job until they reach some sort of product market fit. And only at that point, they raise money, and then very often things play out. Now, that could also mean that it's less, like the projects that happen here are often less risky. Maybe that's the case. But I think both ecosystems have their advantage. The other thing that I've noticed is I feel in Berlin it's easier to hire people from anywhere in the EU and have them move to Berlin. Berlin seems to be very cool, and people generally like to move to Berlin or give it a try. Whereas Switzerland, again, it's a bit more of a more serious decision because people think of it as a very expensive place. And it's just because we're not part of the EU. I feel, in my experience, it's not been as easy migrating people here as in other places.
It's interesting. I mean, that's also what, by the way, the mayor said, that like she can't do anything on the city level, which is interesting, that the canton level needs to decide about the visa. You know, what's interesting, just to wrap up, let's say, the first part of the show, about like you saw now both sides. Is there a preference to either one of them, and why?
For me, I definitely like to be on the entrepreneur side, at least for now. Like, no one knows what changes.
Yes, sure.
But I enjoy being in the driver's seat and being able to influence and build a culture and work on product and really get involved with all the day-to-day decisions. Yeah, so I would definitely say I'm very happy on the side that I'm at right now. But that being said, being on the investor side is also extremely interesting because you see many different companies at once and you can see patterns. And so I think there's advantages for both.
I have 5 questions ready. Usually I have 2 pools of questions, one for investors and one for startups. But here I mixed it because I thought it would be interesting to see like these differences between an investor and a startup in the same person. So, ready for 5 questions?
Always.
Up to 30 seconds. What's most important to you in an investor?
For me, it's the smart money part. So not the money that they're contributing, but the value that they can bring into the company besides money. Usually that means connections, but in the best case, it means experience in the same field of company that we're building.
And the opposite side now, what's most important to you in an entrepreneur?
A certain thirst or hunger for success. Because I know there will be tough times, and I want to believe that that person will see everything as a challenge and not as a problem.
As a challenge and not as a problem. What can you maybe explain the differentiation between these 2 words? I mean, because, you know, like, I guess most people who are not entrepreneurs, I would say they're synonyms. I think I understand you, but maybe...
So for me, a problem has a negative connotation.
Yes.
It means I'm sad, or it doesn't make me feel good. Whereas a challenge is an opportunity for me to grow. It's something that I might not have expected, but if I have an adventurous mindset or a curious mindset, I can see what other people might see as a problem as an opportunity to grow, and that's what I call a challenge.
Yeah. Next one. What would you like to see in the next 5 years in your ecosystem?
I'm kind of hopping between different ecosystems right now. So one thing that always bothers me, but I don't really believe that it will change, is how many lawyers are involved in very simple processes in the US. Yeah, that's something that's frustrating for me as an entrepreneur because it just delays stuff. It costs a lot of money. So that would be one thing. If I think about Zurich, I think bringing more talent here would be one ask that I have. Like making it easier for other nationalities to move here and work here would be a big advantage for a lot of the tech startups that I see here in Switzerland.
Tell us one thing you learned the hard way as an investor.
I think a lot of people lessons and negotiations. And I'm aware that while we're still an investor and an existing company and we haven't invested yet, we're kind of not sitting on the same side of the table. Negotiations are going on, and you have to do due diligence, and things might be portrayed a bit better than they actually are. I think that's part of the game, But I feel as soon as you've combined and you sit on the same, or as soon as I've invested and I sit on the same side of the table, I think openness is extremely important. I believe in having very open and unstructured discussions and just focusing on what's most important for the business and the entrepreneur instead of any KPIs or metrics or discussing a certain number.
It's your time now to shine, especially if you say like, this is going to be my legacy, and you say like, this is something that you feel yourself, or like you see yourself, or everybody sees you as an expert. You have now about 60 seconds to give over like one advice that you would say is everything combined, let's say in one sentence that you would say you can give my audience on the way.
So I'm going to use something that applies to all areas of life.
Yes.
I think living very consciously. Like live consciously would be my advice. And what I mean by that is the only thing that we're never going to get back is time. What I always try to avoid in my life is regret. So all bigger or smaller decisions, I try to make very consciously. I think about them. Because then even if it turns out that it was a mistake, at least in the future, I'm not going to have regret. I'm not going to look back and say, oh, I should have spent more time thinking about this, or I should have considered more, or be more open to the emotions that I felt. Yeah, so what I do is like every 90 days, I take a day off and I sit down and I write about 12 areas of my life, write about an introspective of myself, like how do I feel about each area? I become very conscious about where I feel good and where I feel I need to change something, and then I try to implement those changes within the next 90 days.